Elfin Hill. Some large lizards were nimbling running about in the clefts of an old tree. They understood one another very well, for they all spoke the lizard language. "I wonder what is rumbling and rattling in yon old Elfin Hill," said the first lizard. "I have been unable to shut an eye for the last 2 nights. So great was the noise. It was just as bad as a toothache, for that also prevents me from sleeping." "I am sure that there is something going on," said another lizard. "They had the top of the hill propped up on 4 red pillars until the cock crowed this morning. It must be well aired. The Elfin girls have also learned new dances. Surely there is something on." "Yes," said a third lizard, "I have seen an earthworm of my acquaintance, just when it came out of the hill where it had been groping about in the ground, day and night. It has heard a good deal. The unfortunate animal cannot see, but knows well enough how to wriggle about and listen. They expect visitors in the Elfin Hill, and very distinguished ones too, but whom the earthworm was unwilling or unable to tell me. All the will-o-wisps are ordered to take part in a torchlight procession, as it is called. The silver and gold, of which there is plenty in the hill, is polished and placed out in the moonlight." "Who may these visitors be?" asked all the lizards. "What are they doing? Listen how it hums and rumbles." No sooner had they said this than the Elfin Hill opened, and an old elfin girl, hollow at the back, came tripping out. She was the housekeeper of the old elfin king, and being distantly connected with the family, she wore an amber heart on her forehead. Her feet moved so nimbly, trip, trip. Good gracious, how she could trip! She went straight down to the sea, to the night raven. "I have to invite you to the Elfin Hill for tonight," she said. "But you would do us a great favor if you would undertake the invitations. You ought to do something, as you do not entertain yourself. We expect some very distinguished friends, sorcerers, who can tell us something. That is why the old king of the elves wishes to show off." "Who is to be invited?" asked the night raven. "All the world may attend the grand ball, even human beings, if they can talk in their sleep or know anything of the like which is according to our ways. But for the feast the company has to be strictly select. We only wish to have tip-top society." "I have had an argument with the king, for in my opinion not even ghosts ought to be admitted. The merman and his daughters have to be invited first of all. Perhaps they may not like to come to the dry land, but we shall provide them with wet stones to sit on, or with something still better, and under these circumstances I think they will not refuse this time. All the old demons of the first class, with tails such as the goblins, we must invite, of course. Further, I think, we must not forget the grave pig, the death horse, nor the church dwarf. They belong, it is true, to the clergy, who are not of our class, but that is only their vocation. They are our near relatives, and frequently call upon us." "Croak," said the night raven, and flew off at once to invite the people. The Elfin girls were already dancing on the hill. They were wrapped in shawls made of mist and moonshine, which look very pretty to people who like things of this kind. The large hall in the center of the Elfin Hill was beautifully adorned. The floor had been washed with moonshine, while the walls had been polished with a salve prepared by witches, so that they shined like tulip leaves in the light. In the kitchen they were very busy. Frogs were roasting on the spit. Dishes of snail skins with children's fingers and salads of mushroom seed, hemlock, and mouse noses were preparing. There was beer of the marsh woman's make, sparkling wine of saltpeter from the grave vaults. All was very substantial food. The dessert consisted of rusty nails and glass from church windows. The old king of the elves had his golden crown polished with crushed slate pencil. It was the same as used by the first form, and indeed it is difficult for an elf king to obtain such slate pencils. In the bedroom, curtains were hung up and fastened with snail slime. There was a running, rumbling, and jostling everywhere. Now let us perfume the place by burning horsehair and pig's bristles, and then, I think, I have done all I can, said the old elfin girl. Father dear, said the youngest daughter, may I now know who our distinguished guests will be? Well, I suppose I may tell you now, he said. 2 of my daughters must be prepared for marriage, for 2 will certainly be married. The old goblin of Norway, who lives in the old Dovre mountains and possesses many strong castles built on the cliffs and a gold mine, which is much better than people think, will come down with his 2 sons, who are both looking out for a wife. The old goblin is as genuine and honest an old chap as Norway ever brought forth. He is merry and straightforward, too. I have known him a very long time. We used to drink together to our good friendship. He was last here to fetch his wife. She is dead now. She was a daughter of the king of the Chalk Hills near Moen. He took his wife on tick, as people say. Oh, how I am longing for the dear old goblin again. They say his sons are somewhat naughty and forward, but people may do them wrong by supposing that, and I think they will be all right when they grow older. Let me see that you can teach them good manners. When are they coming? Asked one of the daughters. That depends on wind and weather, replied the king of the elves. They travel economically. They will come when they have the chance to go by ship. I wished them to come through Sweden, but that was not to the old man's liking. He does not advance with time, and I do not like that at all. Just then 2 will-o'-the-wisps came leaping in, the one much quicker than the other, and therefore one arrived first. They are coming, they cried. Give me my crown, and let me stand in the moonshine, said the elf king. The daughters raised their shawls and bowed to the ground. There stood the old goblin from Dovre. He wore a crown of hardened ice and polished fir cones. He was wrapped in a bear skin, and had large warm boots on. His sons, on the contrary, had nothing round their necks, and no braces on their trousers, for they were strong men. Is that a hill? Asked the youngest of the boys, pointing to the Elfin hill. We should call it a hole in Norway. Boys, said the old man, you ought to know better. A hole goes in, a hill stands out. Have you no eyes in your heads? The only thing that struck them, they said, was that they were able to understand the language without any difficulty. Don't be so foolish, said the old goblin. People might think you are still unfledged. Then they all went into the Elfin hill, where the distinguished visitors had assembled, and so quickly that it seemed as if the wind had blown them together. But everyone was nicely and well accommodated. The sea folks sat at dinner in big water tubs. They said they felt quite at home. All showed very good breeding, except the 2 young goblins of the north, who put their legs on the table, for they imagined that they might take such liberties. Take your feet off the table, said the old goblin, and they obeyed, though reluctantly. They tickled their fair neighbors at table with fir cones, which they brought in their pockets. They took their boots off in order to be at ease, and gave them to the ladies to hold. But their father, the old Dovre goblin, was quite different. He talked so well about the stately Norwegian rocks, and of the waterfalls which rushed down with a noise like thunder and the sound of an organ, forming white foam. He told of the salmon which leap against the rushing water when the wreck begins to play on the golden harp. He spoke of the fine moonlight winter nights, when the sleigh bells are ringing and the young men skate with burning torches in their hands over the ice, which is so clear and transparent that they frighten the fishes under their feet. He could talk so well that those who listened to him saw all in reality. It was just as if the sawmills were going, and as if servants and maids were singing and dancing. Suddenly the old goblin gave the old elfin girl a kiss, and it was a real kiss. And yet they were almost strangers to each other. After this the elfin girls had to perform their dances, first in the ordinary way, and then with stamping of their feet, and it looked very well. Afterwards came the artistic and solo dance. Good gracious, how they threw their legs up! Nobody knew where they began or where they ended, nor which were the legs and which were the arms. All were flying about like sawdust, and they turned round so quickly that the death horse and the grave pig became unwell and had to leave the room. "Hello!" cried the old goblin. "That is a strange way of working about with the legs. But what do they know besides dancing, stretching the legs, and producing a whirlwind?" "That you shall soon see," said the Elf King, and called the youngest of his daughters. She was as nimble and bright as moonshine. She was indeed the finest looking of all the sisters. She took a white chip of wood into her mouth and disappeared instantly. That was her accomplishment. But the old goblin said he should not like his wife to possess such a power, and was sure his sons would be of the same opinion. The second could walk by her own side as if she had a shadow, while everybody knows that goblins never have a shadow. The third was quite different in her accomplishments. She had been apprenticed to the marsh woman in the brewery, and knew well how to lard elder tree logs with glowworms. "She will make a good housekeeper," said the old goblin, drinking her health with his eyes, as he did not wish to take anything more. Now came the fourth, with a large harp to play upon. No sooner had she struck the first chord than all lifted up the left leg, for the goblins are left-legged, and when she touched the strings again, everyone had to do what she wished. "That is a dangerous person," said the old goblin, and his two sons went out of the hill, for now they had seen quite enough. "What does your next daughter know?" asked the old goblin. "I have learned to admire all that is Norwegian, and I shall never marry unless I can go to Norway." But the smallest of the sisters whispered into the old man's ear, "That is only because she has heard in a Norwegian song that when the world is destroyed through water, the Norwegian cliffs will remain standing like monuments. Therefore she wishes to go there, because she is so much afraid of being drowned." "Ho, ho!" said the old goblin. "Is that really what she meant? But tell me, what can the seventh and last do?" "The sixth comes before the seventh," said the Elf King, for he could count, but the sixth was rather timid. "I can only tell people the truth," she said at last. "Nobody cares for me, and I am sufficiently occupied in making my shroud." Now came the seventh and last. What could she do? Why, she could tell fairy tales, and as many as ever she wished. "Here are my 5 fingers," said the old goblin. "Tell me one for each of them." And she took him by the wrist, and he laughed so much that he was nearly choked. When she came to the ring finger, which had a golden ring upon it, as if it was aware that a betrothal should take place, the old goblin said, "Hold fast what you have. This hand is yours. I shall marry you myself." Then the elfin girls said that the tales of the ring finger and that of Peter Playman had yet to be told. "Those we shall hear in the winter," said the old goblin, "and also those of the birch tree, of the ghost's presence, and of the creaking frost. You shall relate all your stories, for nobody up there can tell stories well. And then we shall sit in the rooms of stone where the pine logs are burning, and we shall drink mead out of the drinking horns of the old Norwegian kings. Rek has made me a present of a couple of them, and when we are sitting there the mermaid will come to see us. She will sing to you all the songs of the shepherd girls in the mountains. We shall enjoy it very much. The salmon will leap up in the waterfalls against the stone walls, but they cannot come in. Indeed, life is very pleasant in dear old Norway. But where are my boys? Where had they gone to? They were running about in the fields and blowing out the will-o'-the-wisps who had so kindly come to march in the torchlight procession. "What have you been doing?" asked the old goblin. "I have taken a new mother for you. Now you can each choose one of the aunts." But the boys declared that they preferred to make speeches and drink. They had no wish to marry. And they began to make speeches, drank to other people's health, and emptied their glasses to the dregs. Afterwards they took off their coats and placed themselves on the tables to sleep, for they did not stand on ceremonies. But the old goblin danced with his young sweetheart about the room, and exchanged boots with her, for that is more fashionable than exchanging rings. "The cock is crowing," cried the old elfin girl that did the housekeeping. "Now we must close the shutters, lest the sun burn us." Then the hill was closed up, but outside the lizards were running about in the cleft tree, and one said to the other, "I like the old Norwegian goblin very much." "I prefer the boys," said the earthworm, but the unfortunate animal could not see.